of options to impose the martial law or the use of insurrection. Good evening and welcome to the show. On the show tonight, we've got some serious analysis. I'll be starting today by listing out some of the options still available for Trump, and then we're going to move on to the ones that he wants to be focusing on, which is on January 6th. After that, talk about Ted Cruz's statement and the 10 days committee, how that will work out exactly. I will also finish off today with the discussion of Trump's leaked call with Brad Raffensperger and also Lin Wood's tweets regarding a pedophile ring used to blackmail prominent figures around the world. Let's get into it. Let's break down our first topic. I want to take a look at what are the still options available to Trump at this particular moment that will lead him to the path of victory. This is going to be an updated video to my previous videos where I've covered some of these paths. Now, these plans are still definitely up to changes, especially post January 6th. So I will be updating them as we go. The first plan is actually to talk about one of the most popular options outside of the electoral counting process on January 6th. And this process is through the national emergency that was declared in 2018. Through this executive order, this allows two places to matter. The first is actually having a report from the Director of National Intelligence, who is also the head of the entire U.S. intelligence community, is the head of the offices of all of the agencies, including the CIA and the NSA and more. The DNI will produce a report soon that will outline the findings of foreign countries actually involved in this election. And this report, as the director John Ratcliffe had recently said, will involve the CCP's potential involvement in the election process. Along with that are Iran, Russia, and potentially Serbia as well. Now, why does this matter? Well, in this executive order, Trump had declared a national emergency, which extends his power to direct resources to investigate foreign interferences. And if the report is produced on time, it can potentially lead to this election becoming invalidated, because there are clear evidence of a foreign country or multiple foreign countries attacking U.S. election, which is a constitutional process. Trump could likely categorize it as an attack on U.S. sovereignty. The report also has another hidden plan to expose the CCP, who I think is most likely the perpetrator of election meddling, which allows the U.S. government to apply hard sanctioning on them. The second path is using witnesses. There are three key people I need to mention if they do show up. Now, obviously, they're all speculations, but the first one is Jeffrey Epstein. Now, some are saying he's still alive, for example, according to Lin Wood. Wouldn't he be the most prominent witness to ever step into court? Along with that is Edward Snowden, who is supposedly rumored to be pardoned by Trump, and also Bill Barr, who had just resigned as the Attorney General. He's now available to testify. These people could all potentially show up on January 6th, among with the witnesses who may have participated in the acts of voter fraud themselves. And here's the catch. If the lawmakers see all of these hard evidence, stuff Trump has never shown to the public before, and is literally there, if these lawmakers are still willing to certify the votes for Biden, then that just shows the public exactly what is happening in the swamp of DC. Now, the disclaimer is that these people are just rumored to be available. We don't actually know if they're an option for Trump. Now, the third path is using the secret operation inside the Defense Department, which is the Kraken program that is exclusive to the Defense Department's intelligence military branch. Now, this military intelligence inside the DoD is headed by Ezra Cohen Watnick, who is currently the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. This path is very secretive, that no one except Trump and the Defense Department, even certain parts of the Defense Department, don't know about. Now, this Kraken program is actually a supercomputer, and its existence is quite unknown. But the Kraken has the ability to hack into other systems, such as the CIA's hammer and scorecard system, as well as capturing the vote changes that occurred on election night. The reason this path might work is that it's a last resort, as it is revealing what was essentially all of the secrets of the military. Because think about it, Biden's transition team inside the Pentagon has been repeatedly denied access to these top secrets by Ezra Cohen because of the importance and the secret it holds. If Trump needs to do a drastic reveal, this wouldn't be the bad one to give up. But like I mentioned, this is sort of the last-ditch effort. This next path is the one that I've covered recently, which is using military tribunals. And this path has a specific set of requirements that could potentially be triggered by any of the other paths. It just depends on the evidence at hand. Now, this path is using military tribunal to put treasonous individuals on trial directly from the military courts. This bypasses civil courts, which has a long process. This path involves individuals who are arrested on the grounds of treason. Some degree of foreign interaction, say, with the likes of the CCP to meddle in this election would be a great reason to consider treason charges. If you want the full breakdown of the military courts, check out this video. The next path sort of interconnects all of the other paths, which is to appoint a special prosecutor that has the absolute authority to indict and prosecute anyone who is found guilty of election interference. The special prosecutor is again one of the very constitutional paths. For someone like Sidney Powell or Rudy Giuliani would be a great candidate to take on the mantle. Along with that, Special Counsel John Durham, who was appointed by Bill Barr as the last effort to ensure an investigation into the 2016 election to be continued. Now, Durham has yet to produce any significant results for that though. So we're not really sure if he's to be trusted. The next path is about declassifying all of the documents related to the 2016 and also the 2020 election findings. And this could include the reports from the DNI, as well as any secret investigations into election interference and evidence that is not public. Here's the interesting part. We have a lot of evidence that is not for public eyes. They were prepared for courts. But Trump's team hasn't gotten any luck at the judicial side of things, and they have been repeatedly rejected by the legal system and are actively being ignored by the Investigation Bureau and the Congress. So Trump still has a lot of options to impose the martial law or the use of insurrection, depending on the situation. But as he said, it's unlikely as he will try to remain constitutional. There are still these more plans out there that sort of branch and stem from all of these other paths that I've just talked about. But here's the real problem. Trump said he wants to follow the Constitution, as I've previously stated, but his opponents don't really play by the facts, and they're not playing fair. They're playing unfair in this game by changing the rules themselves. I do want to be realistic here and say that many of these options will become less and less useful as we go past the January 6th deadline. That is because if January 6th fails, then we can't rule out the possibility of a Biden presidency. Past that, if Trump tries to do anything, the left and the legacy media will just paint it as a coup or as treason. So what Trump must do is to have the conviction to go actually beyond the limits of the Constitution when the time comes, to bear the pressure. Now let's face it, if January 6th indeed becomes the date that Biden is won through the Congress, it is the date that the Constitution has failed to uphold the integrity of this nation. And it is the date that the people of this country will probably lose faith in all of the people that were sworn an oath to protect the Constitution. With every ground shattered, Trump must plan to protect his people. So many of these paths I've mentioned above are both closing its doors, but also opening at the same time. It all depends on how Trump will use it. What I will say is that on January 6th, it will be the day to judge if democracy is upheld or trampled beneath the lies that were voter fraud. Before I move on to what happens after January 6th, take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Comment what you would like to see in our future videos or what topics interest you. As well, follow me on my social media pages at DavidZhangBTN on both Parler and Twitter. Okay, let me talk about January 6th then. Our next topic is diving deep on the scenarios on Wednesday, January 6th. What happens after this day, or I guess on this day? It's super important because it essentially tells us if Congress is willing to fight for the people or not. On this day, we're going to have an upward of 1 million Trump supporters gathering on the Capitol Hill to support the objection of the votes cast for Biden. Let me do a quick breakdown of the process on that day, and then I'll get into a few scenarios. The counting will start around 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Vice President Mike Pence will preside over the joint session, where he will count each state's electoral votes. When a state's votes are brought up for counting, lawmakers in both the chambers can object to the votes being cast for a candidate. This is the important part. If the pair of senator and Congress member object to the votes cast for that candidate and is giving a written argument, then the chambers must retire to a 2-hour debate, separately by the way, on the dot, which then will lead to a voting process. Now this process, the key to consider is that both the House and the Senate must vote the same way for the objection to stand. That's according to the Constitutional Research Service. Okay, just to repeat, both House and the Senate must vote the same to object. In any case of difference in their voting, then the objection will not stand, and the votes will still go to the candidate it was cast for. If the two chambers vote the same to object, then those votes are set aside. Then what happens if the votes are set aside? Well, the problem is we have very little precedence over this type of situation. It might have happened once or twice. Right now, based on the 12 senators led by Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, along with 160 plus now representatives, we know that we will get objections for probably at least 3 states, which means in the scenario that those votes are set aside, it's most likely going to lead to a contingent election per the 12th Amendment, which is when each state in the House will get 1 vote for their candidate. Now in this situation, we have a Republican state majority, which would most likely lead to a Trump win. And that happens when neither candidates reach 270 mark. But what we also have is the other way around, where we have objections that don't really stand, and the votes are still cast for Biden. It's actually more likely following the regular procedure, considering that the Democrat control the House and the Senate Republican leadership, including McConnell, will not be objecting to the votes. Let's talk about those who will be objecting. So then what we should bank on is the 2-hour debates. In this part, each Congress lawmaker gets 5 minutes to present their arguments, in which, according to Jason Miller, a senior Trump advisor, there is the possibility of them presenting a specific set of evidence to the joint session related to voter fraud. And this is actually the climax of the play. This is where we're going to see all of the shocking evidence I was talking about earlier. Because if we don't, I highly doubt that this whole situation would favor Trump. So he actually must be moving to the second part of the plan if the first part fails, which is to use the more extreme methods, quote unquote. This day is also the day in which Trump will see who are his true supporters, who are the rhinos, who are really against him. This is also why, imagine if we had a witness in the caliber of Jeffrey Epstein would be still alive and show up, how much shock would that bring to the Congress floor and the entire nation? At that moment, if senators and the congressmen are still going to vote for Biden, given all of the clear evidence that will be presented, it's very clear we can see who and what they're standing for. But what happens in the case that Trump loses the January 6th ruling? In this scenario, well, Senator Ted Cruz had proposed a 10-day investigation through a committee, which would essentially halt the electoral process and temporarily suspend the electoral voting process to allow an investigation to occur. So we don't really even reach the voting process on January 6th, or not let it finish. I welcome this decision only because it might work. Ted Cruz told Maria Bartiromo in an interview that 12 senators will object to certification, force an appointment of an emergency election commission to audit and assess claims of fraud, before the inauguration that is. Then, based on the findings, each state can choose through their state assembly, which slate of electoral votes to send. This was backed up by Peter Navarro and Rudy Giuliani, who with their team had held a meeting with multiple state senators and representatives on Saturday to ensure that Trump's slate of votes are cast later on. Cruz explained that the proposal for an electoral commission was a third option that is moored in the law and supported by historical precedents. He pointed to the 1876 presidential election between Republican nominee Rutherford Hayes and Democrat nominee Samuel Tilden. During that race, 3 states, Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina, as well as 1 electoral votes from Oregon, remained in dispute. The 3 contested states, which were disputed due to the voter fraud allegations and election irregularities, had submitted 2 sets of electoral ballots. As a compromise, Congress in 1877 established a bipartisan electoral commission made up of 5 House members, 5 senators, and 5 Supreme Court justices to hear the claims and determine how the unassigned electoral votes should be awarded. So that year's election was basically determined by 15 people. According to Peter Navarro, Vice President Pence actually has the authority to give a 10-day window. As well, apparently, he also says Vice President Pence has the ability to somehow change the date of inauguration on January 20th, which I haven't been able to find out how. So basically now what the senator wants to do is change the January 6th into a day which it calls for a committee rather than a voting process. Now this is both a good thing and a bad thing too. There is a chance, a very high chance, that the committee won't find any fraud in this investigation and then they're just wasting more time. But if they did, it would delegate the states to choose their electoral votes themselves, which means as 7 states had previously cast their alternative slate of electoral votes for Trump, would actually have a massive chance of getting those through Congress, as the state-hold Republican majorities would give the votes to Trump. So then what if this fails? Between the 10-day period, which could take us right to January 16th, just 4 days before inauguration. This is after the investigation is over. That would leave Trump with only 4 days to act through other paths that I've mentioned just earlier. So based on all of this, it's actually more probable for Trump to focus more on giving hard evidence at the joint session on January 6th than to bank on the emergency committee to help him find the votes. To summarize, January 6th to me is the last day to fight for the Constitution. If it stands, then Trump will win. But if the fraud overcomes the Constitution, then the Republic is facing a crisis never before. Trump must act on the conviction through drastic measures. Now let's go on to our next topic, which is Lin Wood making a series of tweets that are both scary but also worth talking about, but needs to be evaluated. In a series of tweets, he outlined groups or organizations that involved in blackmailing key individuals around the world through pedophilia videos. He's asking President Trump to appoint an investigation council. He lists that 10 intelligence organizations around the world, including the CCP and the CIA. This is actually a very haunting accusation because these organizations were blackmailing individuals. Blackmailing, as we know it, is a very real thing that happens to high-level officials. But this time, pedophilia blackmailing. This is like Jeffrey Epstein stuff. For example, in a video I made on Fang Fang, the Chinese spy, or her name was Christine Fang, who gained political access and power through romantic or sexual relationship with at least 2 mayors and potentially Rep. Eric Swalwell. This indicates that many Americans are actually unaware that this is a common tactic used by the CCP. One of their tactics, which is feeding on the desires of the politicians and key figures. They can use young girls, or in this case, underage children, and videotape them in the act to control them via blackmailing. If Lin's story is true, this means that the CCP uses not only honey traps, but also child traps to feed the sick minds of the politicians and the prominent figures. Honey traps and child sex trafficking rings are serious risks regarding to the loss of sensitive information and classified information, and in particular its use for blackmailing. American politicians in different positions of power, including those in the intelligence community and especially members of Congress, are all primary targets for this. Basically, this seemingly very crazy talk from lawyer Lin Wood is actually worth watching out for. If he's, being targeted for this, then that means what he said is true. And finally, our last topic today is about the call between President Trump and Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. On Sunday, the Trump campaign responded to a full recording that was obtained by and released by Washington Post of a call between President Trump and Georgia's Secretary of State, which focused on the issues of election integrity. The Washington Post initially released snippets of the hour-long call, which also involved the participation of White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Trump campaign's lawyer Cleta Mitchell, and also Raffensperger's lawyer Ryan Germany. The full transcript of the call reveals the president laying out a number of specific claims of election irregularities, including double voting, dead people voting, and Trump votes being shredded, along with other allegations of cheating and corruption that the president said denied him a win in Georgia. Raffensperger and Germany repeatedly countered Trump's claim during the call, generally asserting that the issue raised by the president were either inaccurate or have been probed and shown to be untrue. Now, Jason Miller, senior advisor to the Trump campaign, wrote in a tweet calling for the full release of the videotape, even after said the criticisms for Raffensperger were spot on. Now, this conversation is amidst 2 lawsuits filed against Raffensperger. So this call was a confidential one, And I'm not going to spend time reading you all of the details President Trump listed, but what I will say is that go listen to the full tapes, I'll link the description, and determine for yourself what exactly occurred. Because to me, it sounds like that Trump is giving Raffensperger a chance to correct his wrong. And Trump listed so much clear evidence of fraud to him, just so to have Raffensperger and his lawyers pretend that nothing could happen. Charlie Kirk says that the leaking of presidential calls is a national security threat, and Raffensperger should be investigated. Now, this is a very strange thing for Raffensperger to do because we know Trump is both the same on the phone and in front of the camera, and he really has nothing to hide. So this won't make Trump seem like a bad person or anything, especially what Trump said in the call is actually worth a full-on investigation anyways. Alright, that is it for today. Unfortunately, I didn't get to cover Mike Pompeo's tweeting today. I'll leave that for tomorrow. Over the next 2 days, there's going to be a lot of things to keep you updated on, especially related to the January 6th voting. As well, there's a lot of possibilities, but also some uncertainties that I haven't really covered. So if any of those come up, I'll make sure to keep you updated. Now, so make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video to break the YouTube censorship. As well, stay notified to hit that bell button. Also, if you want to see what is covered, comment below. I recently decided to post all of my daily topics on the community section of the channel, so make sure to subscribe to comment there. As well, thanks for the continued support to help us grow. Happy New Year. As always, stay safe and take care of yourselves. I'm David Zhang, and you're watching Beyond the Noise. Good night.
This past July, Donald Trump accepted the Republican nomination.
Humbly and gratefully accept your nomination for the presidency of the United States.
It was a moment of vindication for a candidate who had climbed back from a bitter public humiliation.
We're talking about the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Tonight, it's an annual event right here.
Donald Trump has been
It happened in April 2011, at one of Washington, D.C.'s most glamorous nights.
I got to talk to Donald as we were going to our seats, and he was in just such a great mood, and he was very jovial, and people were taking pictures, and it was very exciting that Donald was there. And
Trump's invitation to the exclusive gathering came after weeks of attacking President Barack Obama on television.
You are not allowed to be a president if you're not born in this country. He may not have been born in this country. But there's something on that person, maybe religion, maybe it says he's a Muslim, I don't know. Maybe he doesn't want that, or he may not have one. But I will tell you this, if he wasn't born in this country, it's one of the great scams of all time.
absolutely.
But that night, in front of Washington's journalists, politicians, and power brokers, Obama would hit back.
President Obama takes the microphone.
All right, everybody, please have a seat. Donald Trump is here tonight.
And proceeds to fillet Donald publicly.
No one is happier, no one is prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald. And that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter. Like, did we fake the moon landing?
I was sitting 20 feet from him, and just the look of discomfort on his face.
What really happened in Roswell? And where are Biggie and Tupac?
Donald's face was so incredibly serious. It was so incredibly he just put on a poker face.
I was 2 tables away from Trump. The conventional way in Washington of absorbing a joke at the White House Correspondents' Dinner is to keep your chin up and at least pretend to have a sense of humor about it, even if you go cry into your pillow that night. Trump was steaming. His face was all locked in. He was not having a good time.
All kidding aside, obviously we all know about your credentials and breadth of experience. For example, no, seriously, just recently, in an episode of Celebrity Apprentice, at the steakhouse, the men's cooking team did not impress the judges from Omaha Steaks. And there was a lot of blame to go around, but you, Mr. Trump, recognized that the real problem was a lack of leadership. And so ultimately, you didn't blame Little John or Meatloaf. You fired Gary Busey. And these are the kind of decisions that would keep me up at night.
And he's being treated like a piñata by the President of the United States. And I think he felt humiliated.
Well handled, sir. Well handled.
But it just kept going, and he just kept hammering him. And I thought, oh, Barack Obama is starting something that I don't know if he'll be able to finish.
Say what you will about Mr. Trump. He certainly would bring some change to the White House. Let's see what we've got up there.
Donald dreads humiliation, and he dreads shame. And this is why he often attempts to humiliate and shame other people. So in the case of the president ridiculing him, I think this was intolerable for Donald Trump.
I think that is the night that he resolves to run for president. I think that he is kind of motivated by it. Maybe I'll just run. Maybe I'll show them all.
Every critic, every detractor will have to bow down to President Trump. It's everyone who's ever doubted Donald, whoever disagreed, whoever challenged him. It is the ultimate revenge to become the most powerful man in the universe.
God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
Donald Trump's fantasy is to be the guy who takes the key to the Oval Office from Barack Obama's hand in 2017. And it's personal. This is a burning personal need that he has to redeem himself from being humiliated by the first black president.
Hillary Clinton had spent decades laying the groundwork for her candidacy.
With humility, determination, and boundless confidence in America's promise that I accept your nomination for President of the United States.
Her entrance into politics had been difficult, marked by questions of just who she was.
What kind of plans have you made to be First Lady of Arkansas?
Well, we've spent a lot of time talking about the kinds of work that we want to do.
In Little Rock, the new First Lady, Hillary Rodham, was a curiosity.
We haven't made any final plans. We hope to be.
Hillary, when she first got there, everybody makes such a big deal out of her hippie flowered pants and her big, strange glasses and her crazy hair.
Could it be that you have political aspirations of your own?
No, I just think I don't have any except for my husband, who I think is a terrific politician and a wonderful man.
Arkansas has a new governor.
They looked like they were having a ball. I mean, it was really a heady experience. These were young people.
So help me God.
They were the governor and first lady.
The youngest governor in the United States now, young Governor Clinton of the state of Arkansas.
But Hillary's approach to her new role was seen as unconventional. She kept her maiden name and had her own career as a corporate lawyer.
She didn't want women to be accessories to their husband, and that is usually what a political wife is an accessory to her husband, and it didn't fit well.
The thought occurs to me that you really don't fit the image that we have created for the governor's wife in Arkansas. You're not a native. You've been educated in liberal Eastern universities. You're less than 40. You don't have any children. You don't use your husband's name. You practice law. Does it concern you that maybe other people feel that you don't fit the image that we have created for the governor's wife in Arkansas?
No, because each person should be assessed and judged on, that person's own merits.
They, Southerners, just really rejected this, uppity woman from the, East Coast. She doesn't dress right. She doesn't talk right. Her hair isn't right. She's just no credit. She's not a Southern governor's wife.
We now have a clarification in the state of Arkansas.
The governor's term was only 2 years, and before he knew it, Bill Clinton was out.
Projected the winner over the incumbent Democrat Bill Clinton.
This political defeat has been a bitter pill to swallow for Bill Clinton.
I regret that I will not have 2 more years to serve as governor, because I have loved it.
And here Bill Clinton defeated, and to be rendered a beaten pair at that age was pretty devastating.
Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Hillary, with their new daughter Chelsea, took it hard.
She understood that she was part of the reason for him losing the governor's race, because she wouldn't take his name and just because of the way she was.
Hillary decided to fight. She took charge of her husband's political comeback.
Hillary got very involved in the campaign. For all intents and purposes, she was the campaign manager.
One of her first moves, rebrand herself and become Mrs. Clinton.
It was symbolic. I'm sure she had to swallow hard, but it was just not worth trying to keep her last name at the expense of everything they wanted to achieve together.
In order to avoid any problem and just to put it to rest, I will forever be known as Hillary Rodham Clinton. And
she completely forfeited her own identity, at least physically. Got rid of the glasses, got her hair dyed, started dressing at least modestly better, wore some makeup, cultivated a little bit of a drawl.
The road to being somebody in this society starts with education.
The transformation was a surprise to some of those who had known her the longest.
When she had to begin to change her appearance, dye her hair, lose a lot of weight, get rid of her glasses, not speak up, not be as much who she was, that hurt all of us. We all felt bad about that. It was hard. It was hard on us, it was hard on her.
She formed an alliance with a controversial political consultant from New York, Dick Morris.
She has a wonderful instinct for the jugular. She felt that he lost it because he wasn't tough enough, wasn't strong enough. And she reached out to me because she felt that I would be stronger and tougher.
I think it only intensified and began a lot of the characteristics that you saw from then on, that the ends justify the means, that we'll do what we have to do to win, turn to the dark arts of politics to survive.
Hillary helped engineer a comeback that returned her husband to the governorship and put her in the national spotlight for the next 34 years.
This is New York, a miracle city, a city of tall buildings, narrow, dark streets, magnificent parks, broad avenues, homes and schools, stores and theaters and palatial hotels.
Back in the 1940s,
of Queens, occupying part of Long Island,
just across the East River from Manhattan,
electrical railway system spreads through 4 of the 5 boroughs with a
Donald Trump grew up in a posh suburb called Jamaica Estates.
is perhaps typical of New York's residential areas.
The Trump family had a huge house in Queens that they used to refer to as Tara. It had 9 bedrooms, it had columns, it was quite beautiful, but it was in Queens.
The Trump family would spend 50 years building memories here. Fred Trump, a real estate developer, designed the house himself and raised Donald and his brothers and sisters in luxury.
It's not like he knew anything but comfort. When it rained and he had to deliver his papers, the chauffeur would take him around.
But Donald's father was tough and insisted everyone learn the family business.
He was a guy who worked 7 days a week. It's Sunday, why wouldn't you be working? And would, even on the weekends, would pile the kids in the car and go to a building site, pick up old nails that weren't used. Why would you waste a nail?
Fred Trump was a machine. I mean, he was a human machine. He was driven beyond whatever the description of driven could ever mean. And when you look at the picture of Fred and you look at Donald, you see the great resemblance between the two. And when you think about Fred's energy, you see how it is channeled through Donald.
Fred was seen as passionate about the business, but not warm with his children.
Cold. He was not a warm person. I see his father at the beach, even with a suit and a tie and a hat, a clipped, very kind of military mustache, and simply being correct.
Fred had theories. He shared them with his kids. Donald especially liked one of them.
This is a very deep part of the Trump story. The family subscribes to a racehorse theory of human development, that they believe that there are superior people, and that if you put together the genes of a superior woman and a superior man, you get a superior offspring.
Fred's other theory? Life was a competition. There were winners and there were losers. He called the winners killers.
The way the game got played in his household was, if you did not win, you lost. And losing was you got crushed. Losing was you didn't matter. Losing was you were nothing.
Donald took the lessons to heart, always tried to be the winner. But he was also a handful.
His brother Robert, who's very discreet, told me that Donald was always the kid in the family who would start throwing birthday cake at all the parties, that you would build up a tower of blocks, he would come knock your blocks down.
This is the person he's been, I think, since he was 5 years old. Donald told me that he is essentially the person he was in first grade, and that he hasn't really changed.
His self-definition was built around the idea that he was one tough son of a bitch. That meant in classrooms, that meant with teachers, that meant with his father.
By the 7th grade, even Fred had had it with Donald's mischief. He sent him up the Hudson River, just a few miles from West Point, to the toughest boarding school he could find, the New York Military Academy.
You have to think of this 13-year-old kid who's lived a very comfortable life, but then all of a sudden, he's the one child of 5 to be banished to this austere life. Goodbye luxury, goodbye mom and dad, brothers and sisters, hello drill sergeant.
The New York Military Academy was no nonsense, heavy on the discipline. Over the years, home to the children of gangster John Gotti and Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista.
It was a very austere, very scary place. I was homesick. I was crying hysterically. In fact, I was crying so much the first couple of nights they put me in the infirmary.
We were in a culture of hazing at the military school. Everyone, I mean, that's just the way it was.
You got hit, you might have gotten slammed against the wall, you got put artificially into fights.
But the rough and tumble didn't seem to bother Donald. He thrived.
He liked it. Apparently, he really liked it. He liked the accountability, he liked the kind of clarity of it, and he liked that there was a medal and a prize for everything.
He was a star athlete. He claimed he could have played pro baseball. But his classmates agree he was proudest of winning the ultimate accolade in an all-boys school. He was named Ladies' Man in the school yearbook. Hugh Hefner, the publisher of Playboy, was a role model for many of the boys.
Yeah, he had a very Hugh Hefner, Playboy magazine view of success.
The young cadets learned a lot from Playboy magazine and what they called barracks talk.
In fact, our biggest advice and, our lives came from Playboy magazine. That's how we learned about women. So that was all of my adolescence. And that's why getting out of military school was difficult. You had to realize that you couldn't just follow the Playboy philosophy.
They would graduate and grow up. But Donald's classmates say in some ways, he hasn't changed at all.
The things that we talked about at that time in 1964 really are very close to the kind of way he talks now. I hear these echoes of the barracks life that we had and that we grew out of.
Back when Donald Trump was growing up in Queens, Hillary Rodham was living a short train commute from downtown Chicago.
Hugh and Dorothy Rodham moved from Chicago, the tough city, into the all-white new suburb of 1950s America.
And I remember men walking home from work from the train station with their cigarettes dangling and their Chicago American evening newspaper under their arm.
They called Park Ridge an idyllic American suburb. Hillary has said her life was straight out of the 1950s sitcom Father Knows Best.
Story of a man, his home, and his family, starring Robert Young.
But the truth was much more complicated. Inside the Rodham family, Hillary's father, Hugh, was a staunchly conservative and demanding presence.
Hugh and Hillary always had a relationship that had its difficulties. Hillary goes to school and makes straight A's, and he says, that must be a really easy school if you got straight A's. I mean, gets no credit for her effort, no credit for her work.
With Hillary's mom, Dorothy, the treatment was worse.
Her father was abusive verbally and dismissive when her mother and father would have this tense, demeaning discussions, and Hillary would run to her room and put her hands over her ears and say, I can't stand listening to this.
There was a lot of fighting in the Rodham household, and I don't think she invited many friends home. That's when her whole penchant for secrecy and privacy began.
Dorothy had had to overcome a difficult childhood of her own.
I think the resilience of Dorothy Rodham, this little girl born to 16-year-old parents who did not want her and did not love her. They never showed her any affection, never hugged her, never kissed her, and I think it would have defeated most people.
Dorothy was determined to give Hillary a better life.
I think that Dorothy was frustrated, like many, many women of that era. She had far more abilities, talents, and intelligence than the world or her relationship with her husband allowed her to show. And I think that she poured a lot of that ambition into her daughter.
Outside the home, in room 224 at Eugene Field Elementary School, they saw that ambition early on. Betsy Ebling became her best friend.
I was the new girl in class. And somebody else in the classroom said to me, you know, you're very lucky. You're sitting across from Hillary Rodham. And I said, yeah, she seems very nice. And she said, no, she's captain of the cross.
America, I'll be here in about a year and a half campaigning against you, Governor, I guarantee you that. I shouldn't say this because I just don't want you to tell anybody outside of this room other than the millions of people. No, but you know, I endorsed him. He was in last place. And I endorsed him. He went to first place immediately, and then he won the primary, and then I gave him a couple of rallies, which I don't like doing for other people. I was telling Kelly, I don't do rallies for other people. I do them for me, right? Not that easy, a crowd like this. They say over 25,000 people. Over what? Over a couple of days' notice. Is everybody glad you're here, right? I think so. There is no place like a Trump rally, but you know what? This is a Kelly rally and a David rally. And I wouldn't do it unless I loved them both. I wouldn't do it. But I'm going to be here in a year and a half, and I'm going to be campaigning against your governor and your crazy Secretary of State. That I can tell you. And you have great candidates. They want to turn, the Democrats do, America into Venezuela with no jobs, no prosperity, no rights, no freedom, no future for you and your family. Here is exactly what the radical left will do if they win this runoff election, which we can't let them do tomorrow. Tomorrow's a big day. I guess we have to get over 1 million votes tomorrow, right, Kelly? Over 1 million. All right, that's a lot of votes, Kelly, but we'll do it. And the one thing I know, if they win, I'll get no credit, and if they lose, they're going to blame Trump, these people. And Kelly